Hey everyone, tonight we're leaving behind the great castles, crowded cities, and magnificent royal courts of medieval Europe. Instead, we're walking quietly into the open countryside, where endless green hills stretch toward the horizon and thousands of sheep graze beneath an enormous sky. At first glance, becoming a medieval shepherd sounds wonderfully peaceful. Fresh air every day, beautiful landscapes, gentle animals, and long hours surrounded only by nature. Modern life can feel so busy that spending every day on a quiet hillside almost sounds like a vacation. Unfortunately, the reality was rather different. Behind every peaceful meadow stood a job that demanded extraordinary patience, endless endurance, and a willingness to spend nearly every hour of every day caring for creatures that possessed an astonishing talent for wandering into trouble. Imagine opening your eyes long before sunrise on a cold spring morning somewhere in England, France, or the Holy Roman Empire. Around the year 1400, the stars are still shining overhead. A light mist hangs above the damp grass outside your tiny cottage, and the air feels so cold that every breath escapes in a small white cloud. Most of the village still sleeps beneath rough wool blankets, but your day has already begun. Sheep have absolutely no interest in allowing their shepherd another hour of sleep. They must be checked before daylight, counted before leaving the fields, protected throughout the journey, and guided toward fresh pasture before the sun climbs high into the sky. Every morning begins with exactly the same routine, and missing even one small step could create problems lasting the rest of the day. Before thinking about your own breakfast, you step outside carrying a small lantern whose trembling flame barely pushes back the surrounding darkness. The familiar smell of damp earth, wet grass, and wood smoke fills the cool morning air, while distant owls continue calling across the silent countryside. Ahead of you stands a simple wooden sheepfold built from rough timber and repaired more times than anyone can remember, long before you reach the gate. Quiet sounds drift toward you, soft bleating, gentle movement, hooves shifting against packed earth, hundreds of small lives already waiting for the day to begin. Unlike people, sheep never understand weekends, holidays, or the comforting idea of sleeping just a little longer. Opening the gate always requires patience. Sheep possess a remarkable ability to move exactly where you do not want them to go. Before sunrise, they crowd together, pushing gently against one another while searching for the safest position inside the flock. You slowly walk among them, carrying your lantern low enough to examine each animal carefully. A lame sheep today may become a dead sheep tomorrow. A missing lamb means searching hillsides for hours. A broken fence, discovered too late, may scatter dozens of animals across neighboring fields before breakfast. Every shepherd learns that careful observation saves enormous amounts of work later, even if it means beginning every morning in darkness, while everyone else remains comfortably asleep. Once the first faint orange light begins touching the eastern horizon, the countryside slowly awakens around you. Birds begin singing from hedgerows. Dew sparkles across endless blades of grass. Thin streams of smoke rise from distant cottages where other villagers finally begin lighting their morning fires. Yet your attention remains completely fixed upon the flock standing quietly before you. Every sheep must be counted. Every lamb must remain beside its mother. Every gate must be secured before beginning another journey across hills that seem peaceful only to people who have never spent an entire year trying to keep hundreds of stubborn animals alive. From a distance, shepherding looks wonderfully relaxing. Up close, it becomes one long lesson in responsibility that rarely pauses until long after the sun has disappeared once again. The first sheep finally begin moving through the narrow wooden gate, and like water flowing from a small stream into a wide river, the rest of the flock quietly follows behind. There is no dramatic command, no loud whistle that magically organizes hundreds of animals into perfect lines. Instead, shepherding depends upon patience measured not in minutes but in entire seasons. You walk slowly at the front while your faithful sheepdog circles the edges of the flock with remarkable confidence, gently encouraging wandering animals back toward the group without causing unnecessary panic. The dog understands its work almost as well as you do. It knows which sheep always tries to wander toward fresh grass, which old Away walks more slowly than the others, and which curious lamb is likely to disappear behind the nearest bush simply because something caught its attention. Together you form a partnership built not through spoken language, but through thousands of ordinary mornings spent repeating the same quiet routine beneath changing skies. As the village gradually disappears behind you, the landscape opens into rolling hills covered with fresh spring grass sparkling beneath countless drops of morning dew. The rising sun slowly warms the fields, turning every spiderweb stretched between wild plants into delicate strands of silver light. Small birds dart through nearby hedgerows, searching for insects. Awakened by the growing warmth, while rabbits disappear into underground burrows at the sound of approaching footsteps, everything feels calm, almost impossibly peaceful, yet your eyes never stop moving. A shepherd quickly learns that beauty and danger often exist side by side. A hidden ditch can break a sheep's leg. A loose stone can cause an animal to stumble down a hillside. Thick patches of poisonous plants grow quietly among healthy grass, waiting for hungry mouths, unable to recognize the difference. Every step across the countryside demands attention, because even the smallest mistake may cost a family's livelihood before the day has ended. Unlike farmers who spend much of their time working one familiar field, a shepherd belongs to the landscape itself. Every hill, stream, woodland path, and open meadow gradually becomes as familiar as the rooms inside your own cottage. You know exactly where sweet grass grows earliest in spring. You know which slopes remain green during dry summers and which valleys become dangerously muddy after several days of heavy rain. You remember where wolves were last seen years ago, where foxes hide among dense bushes, and where shallow streams become surprisingly deep after mountain snow begins melting upstream. This knowledge never comes from books. It is collected slowly through countless walks beneath every imaginable season, stored carefully inside memory, because forgetting even one small detail may eventually place the entire flock in danger. The sheep themselves possess personalities far more distinct than most people realize. One old ram always insists on walking proudly at the very front, regardless of where you actually wish the flock to travel. Several younger sheep constantly wander toward patches of grass that appear greener than everything surrounding them, encouraging others to follow until half the flock suddenly drifts away from the intended path. Handful of older youths behave almost like experienced mothers, calmly leading nervous lambs through streams or over rocky ground without hesitation. Then there are the lambs themselves, wonderfully energetic and endlessly curious, they leap across small rocks for no obvious reason, chase birds they could never hope to catch, and occasionally stop in complete fascination simply to watch butterflies floating through warm afternoon air. Their innocence brings quiet moments of joy, yet it also creates endless opportunities for trouble. Every shepherd understands that lambs possess an astonishing ability to transform peaceful mornings into frantic searches within only a few careless moments. By the time the sun climbs higher above the hills, the flock has spread across a broad meadow where fresh grass grows thick and plentiful. At last, the sheep lower their heads and begin grazing with slow, steady determination. To someone passing in the distance, this may appear to be the easiest occupation imaginable. Hundreds of animals stand peacefully beneath open skies while one shepherd rests quietly nearby. From afar, it almost resembles leisure rather than labor. Yet appearances remain wonderfully deceptive. A shepherd is never truly resting. Even while sitting upon a weathered stone or leaning against an ancient oak tree, your eyes constantly scan the landscape. You count sheep almost without realizing it. You notice sudden silence among birds. You watch distant tree lines for unusual movement. You study gathering clouds that might bring heavy rain before evening. You observe every small change because the countryside often whispers warnings long before real danger arrives. Those who fail to notice those whispers rarely remain shepherds for very long. Hours pass with remarkable slowness upon the open hills. There are no church bells marking every task, no crowded streets filled with merchants, and no castle courtyards buzzing with constant activity. Instead, time seems measured by the movement of sunlight across the grass, the slow drifting of clouds overhead, and the steady rhythm of sheep grazing from one patch of meadow to the next. At first, such silence feels wonderfully peaceful. After months and years, however, it becomes something far more complicated. Many shepherds spend entire days speaking almost exclusively to their dog, to their sheep, or quietly to themselves. Travelers are rare, conversations even rarer. The nearest human voice may belong to another shepherd watching a distant hillside several fields away, visible only as a tiny figure beneath the endless sky. Loneliness becomes another companion carried alongside your walking staff, accepted not because it is pleasant, but because the work leaves little alternative. As afternoon approaches, warm sunlight gives way to stronger heat, the thick wool covering every sheep that promises warmth during freezing winters now becomes a heavy burden beneath the summer sun. Animals begin searching for shade beneath scattered trees, while others gather near shallow streams where cool water flows gently across smooth stones. You guide them carefully, ensuring every sheep has an opportunity to drink without crowding or panic. Water appears simple until hundreds of thirsty animals attempt to reach it simultaneously. A frightened sheep slipping into deeper water may trigger confusion throughout the flock, causing dozens of others to surge forward in alarm. Once again, patience proves far more valuable than strength. You wait, guide, observe, and quietly encourage order until every animal has safely quenched its thirst. Only then do you finally kneel beside the same stream, cup your own hands into the cool flowing water, and take your first proper drink since leaving home before sunrise. Even that brief moment of refreshment lasts only seconds before your attention returns once more to the flock. Because a medieval shepherd quickly learns that responsibility always drinks last. The peaceful afternoon rarely remains peaceful for very long. Without warning, one sheep suddenly raises its head from the grass, staring toward a distant hillside as though it has noticed something invisible to everyone else. Within only a few moments, several others stopped grazing as well. Their ears twitched nervously while the entire flock grows strangely quiet. To an inexperienced traveler, this sudden silence might seem unimportant, but to a shepherd it immediately demands attention. Sheep spend nearly every waking moment eating, wandering, or softly calling to one another. When hundreds of animals suddenly become silent together, something has changed somewhere beyond your immediate view. Perhaps it is only a fox moving through tall grass. Perhaps another shepherd is guiding his own flock across the neighboring hill. Or perhaps a hungry wolf has quietly appeared where the sunlight meets the edge of the forest. Whatever the reason, you have already learned never to ignore the instincts of animals that spend every hour watching the world around them. Your faithful sheepdog notices the change almost before you do. The animal lifts its head, sniffs the gentle breeze, and slowly walks toward the edge of the flock without waiting for instructions. Years of working together have created an understanding that words could never fully explain. The dog does not need commands for every movement because it already knows your responsibilities as well as its own. While you climb a nearby rise to gain a better view of the surrounding countryside, the dog quietly circles the sheep, keeping nervous animals grouped together without frightening them further. Watching such teamwork reminds you that a medieval shepherd never truly worked alone. Long before modern technology existed, survival often depended upon partnerships between humans and animals, each relying upon the instincts of the other every single day. Standing upon the hilltop, the landscape stretches endlessly in every direction. Gentle green valleys roll toward distant forests where ancient oak trees seem almost black beneath the afternoon sun. A narrow stream winds through open meadows like a silver ribbon, reflecting brilliant patches of light whenever the breeze disturbs its surface. Far away, tiny cottages appear no larger than children's toys, their thin trails of chimney smoke rising peacefully into the cloudless sky. Beyond them, barely visible against the horizon, the stone tower of a small monastery catches the sunlight for just a moment before disappearing behind another hill. It is an astonishingly beautiful view, the sort of landscape people centuries later might travel great distances simply to admire. Yet, for you, it is not a painting or a pleasant destination. It is your workplace, your responsibility, and occasionally your greatest source of worry. The silence finally breaks as a pair of deer suddenly leap from the woodland edge, racing across the meadow before disappearing over another rise. Almost immediately the sheep relaxed, lowering their heads toward the grass as though nothing unusual had happened. You cannot help smiling quietly to yourself. Not every alarm ends in disaster. Many days pass without wolves, thieves, or dangerous accidents. Yet experience has taught you that assuming every alarm is harmless eventually leads to the one mistake that cannot be undone. Medieval shepherds survive not because danger appears every day, but because they prepare carefully for the day when it finally does. Hours continue passing with remarkable slowness. The flock grazes patiently, moving almost like a slow white cloud drifting across the hillside. Individual sheep wander only a few steps before lowering their heads once more, gradually consuming every patch of fresh grass before Advancing together toward another, you follow at an equally unhurried pace, leaning occasionally upon your long wooden staff, while allowing your eyes to travel constantly from one side of the meadow to the other. Many people imagine this as boredom, yet over the years you discover something unexpected. The countryside is never truly still. Tiny changes unfold every few moments. Clouds gather above distant hills. Hawks circle silently high overhead, searching for careless rabbits. Wildflowers open beneath warm sunlight before slowly closing again as evening approaches. Ants carry impossible burdens across narrow paths, while bees disappear among colorful blossoms. The longer you watch nature, the more impossible it becomes to describe it as empty or uneventful. Eventually, the warmth of the afternoon begins softening into the golden light that announces the approach of evening. Long shadows stretch across the hills, making every sheep appear larger than it truly is. A cool breeze replaces the heavy heat of midday, bringing with it the familiar smell of wild thyme, damp earth, and distant wood smoke from cottages preparing supper. The sheep themselves sense the change without needing clocks or bells. Their grazing slows, their movements become calmer, and the youngest lambs begin staying closer beside their mothers. Before long, you will gather the flock once again for the long journey home. Retracing familiar paths walked hundreds of times before, yet every return carries exactly the same responsibility as every departure. Every sheep that left the fold this morning must return safely before darkness falls. One missing animal means searching fields, forests, rocky hillsides, and stream banks until it is found, even if the stars have already filled the sky. For a medieval shepherd, the day does not end simply because the sun has disappeared. It ends only when every member of the flock is finally safe behind the wooden fence once more, allowing both shepherd and sheep a few precious hours of rest before another long day quietly begins again with the first pale light of dawn. The afternoon slowly surrenders to evening, and with every passing minute the countryside begins changing in ways that only a shepherd truly notices. The brilliant blue sky that stretched endlessly above the hills throughout the day gradually softens into warmer shades of gold, pale orange, and gentle pink. Long shadows spread across the meadows like slow-moving rivers, reaching farther with every moment until entire hillsides seem wrapped in cool darkness, while the highest ground still glows beneath the last warm sunlight. To anyone simply passing through, the landscape has become even more beautiful than it was that morning. To you, however, the changing light signals something entirely different. It is time to begin the most important task of the day, bringing every sheep safely home before darkness falls. Unlike the peaceful journey that carried the flock into the hills after sunrise, the return requires far greater attention. Sheep have spent the entire day spreading across open fields, wandering wherever the grass appeared thickest and sweetest. Some remain close together, while others drift surprisingly far from the center of the flock without ever realizing it. A shepherd cannot simply whistle and expect hundreds of animals to organize themselves. Instead, you begin walking slowly around the outer edge of the meadow, while your faithful dog quietly circles in the opposite direction. Together you gently encourage scattered sheep back toward the center, never rushing them, never frightening them, because frightened sheep rarely make sensible decisions. They run without thinking, push through hedges, leap across narrow streams, and often disappear exactly where you least expect them to go. calmness is always faster than panic, even if it requires considerably more patience. The youngest lambs present an entirely different challenge. Throughout the afternoon, they have exhausted themselves chasing butterflies, climbing rocks, and racing one another across patches of open grass for reasons only young animals could possibly understand. Now, many struggle to keep pace with the older sheep. Tiny legs move as quickly as possible, yet every steep hill feels taller than it did earlier, and every winding path seems much longer. Occasionally, a lamb simply lies down, completely convinced that the world should pause until it has recovered enough energy to continue. Moments like these test every shepherd's patience. You gently lift the tired creature into your arms, carry it across the roughest ground, and quietly place it beside its mother once the path becomes easier again. Such moments happen so often that they become part of the ordinary rhythm of shepherding. Another small responsibility repeated countless times throughout a lifetime. The wind also changes as evening approaches. Warm breezes that drifted lazily across the hills during the afternoon gradually become cooler, carrying with them the rich scent of damp earth, crushed wild herbs beneath hundreds of tiny hooves, and distant smoke rising from village chimneys where families have already begun preparing supper. Every familiar smell reminds you how far from home you still remain. Somewhere beyond the next hill, your own cottage waits, along with a simple meal, a warm fire, and perhaps a few quiet hours before sleep. Yet those comforts remain impossible to enjoy until every sheep has safely returned to the fold. Responsibility always walks ahead of comfort in the life of a medieval shepherd. As the flock slowly descends into a broad valley, you pause beside a shallow stream where the water flows gently over smooth stones, polished by centuries of patient movement. The sheep eagerly gather along the banks for one final drink before continuing home. Their reflections ripple across the clear surface, broken only by the occasional splash of a lamb stepping too quickly into deeper water. You kneel beside the stream yourself, cupping cold water into tired hands before washing dust from your face. The refreshing chill lasts only a few moments before disappearing beneath the steady warmth remaining in your muscles after an entire day of walking. Looking into the moving water, you barely recognize the weathered face staring quietly back at you. Wind, rain, sun, and endless seasons have left their marks more clearly than any mirror ever could. While the flock drinks peacefully, your eyes continue scanning the surrounding landscape almost without conscious effort. Shepherds never truly stop watching. A broken branch high upon a hillside, unusual movement near the forest edge, or a sudden silence among nearby birds immediately captures your attention. Most evenings, nothing unusual happens at all. Yet, experience has taught you that the safest shepherd is rarely the strongest or fastest. Instead, safety belongs to the one who notices small changes before they become large problems. The countryside constantly speaks through subtle signs, clouds gathering unexpectedly, crows taking flight all at once, sheep lifting their heads together toward the same distant point. Every detail carries meaning for those willing to notice. Eventually the flock leaves the stream and continues along a familiar path worn smooth by generations of shepherds who walked exactly the same route centuries before you were born. Every bend in the trail feels almost comforting now. You recognize ancient oak trees twisted into strange shapes by countless winters. You recognize the weathered stone standing alone beside the path where travelers occasionally rest before continuing toward the village, you recognize the broken section of old fence repaired so many times that new timber barely resembles the original wood beneath it. The landscape itself becomes part of your memory, and over time you realize you could probably walk these hills even beneath complete darkness, guided only by habit, instinct, and the quiet confidence earned through years of repeating the same journey every single day. Far ahead, the first sounds of village life slowly reach your ears. A distant church bell announces the approaching evening. Dogs bark excitedly as farmers begin returning with wagons and livestock. Somewhere, a rooster, completely confused by the fading sunlight, crows one final time before settling for the night. Thin columns of smoke rise lazily into the cooling air from dozens of cottage chimneys, carrying the comforting smell of baking bread, boiling vegetables, and burning oak firewood. After spending an entire day surrounded only by open hills and quiet wind, these ordinary sounds feel surprisingly welcoming. They remind you that despite the loneliness of the countryside, home still waits patiently beyond the next rise. The final stretch of the journey often proves the most exhausting. Both shepherd and sheep have spent nearly every waking hour moving across uneven ground. Your boots feel heavier with every step, shoulders ache beneath the weight of your staff, and tired feet complain quietly each time they strike another hid. Stone along the path, even the sheep move differently now. Their energetic wandering has disappeared, replaced by slow, steady determination. They know exactly where they are going. Animals that seemed endlessly curious only hours earlier now think of little beyond reaching familiar shelter. Before darkness completely covers the countryside, at last the wooden sheepfold comes into view exactly where you left it before sunrise. The weathered fence glows softly beneath the fading orange. Light while swallows dart overhead, catching insects that dance above the grass during the final moments of daylight. One by one, the sheep passed calmly through the narrow gate. You count each animal carefully, your lips moving silently with every familiar face entering the enclosure. Numbers become almost musical after so many years. Miss one count, and you begin again from the start. Accuracy matters more than speed. A single missing sheep means another journey into gathering darkness. And no shepherd wishes to spend the night searching lonely hills where wolves, thieves, or hidden ravines wait beyond the reach of a small lantern. Finally, the last away disappears through the gate, followed closely by her playful lamb that somehow managed to stay with the flock all the way home. You close the heavy wooden gate, fasten the simple iron latch, and lean against the fence for just a moment. The day is over. Every animal is safe. Tomorrow the routine will begin again before sunrise. But for now the countryside grows wonderfully quiet. The hills that demanded so much attention throughout the day slowly disappear beneath deep blue evening shadows, while the first bright stars begin appearing high above the peaceful medieval landscape. For a brief moment, standing beside the resting flock with cool evening air brushing gently across your face, you understand why so many shepherds accepted such a difficult life despite its endless hardships. Hidden among the exhausting work, the aching feet, the lonely hours, and the constant responsibility exists a rare kind of peace found only by those who spend their lives walking slowly beneath open skies, following the quiet rhythm of nature one season after another. Night settles slowly across the hills, not all at once, but in gentle stages, that a shepherd comes to recognize as naturally as the changing seasons themselves. The brilliant colors of sunset gradually fade into softer shades of violet and deep blue, while the last traces of golden light disappear behind distant ridges. The sheepfold grows quiet as hundreds of tired animals settle close together, their soft breathing replacing the constant bleating that filled the fields throughout the day. From where you stand beside the weathered wooden fence, the entire countryside seems to exhale after another long day of labor. The wind becomes cooler, carrying the rich scent of damp grass, wildflowers, fresh earth, and smoke drifting from cottages scattered across the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings slowly, each deep note rolling gently across the landscape before fading into the peaceful silence of evening. Although the sheep are finally safe, your work has not yet ended. A responsible shepherd never simply locks the gate and walks away. Instead, you move quietly among the resting animals one final time. Some continue nibbling at small piles of hay placed inside the enclosure, while others lie comfortably upon the dry ground with tired eyes already beginning to close. You kneel beside an older Away whose movement seemed slower than usual during the journey home. Carefully running your hand along her legs, you search for cuts, swelling, or hidden injuries caused by rough stones or uneven ground. Fortunately, she appears healthy, merely exhausted after another long walk across the hills. Such inspections may seem unnecessary to someone unfamiliar with medieval farming, but every sheep represents valuable wool, future lambs, and precious income capable of supporting an entire family through difficult seasons. Ignoring a small injury today could mean losing an animal tomorrow. Nearby, several tiny lambs press closely against their mothers, searching for warmth as the cool evening air settles across the countryside. Watching them always brings a quiet sense of satisfaction. Only a few months earlier, many of these animals had entered the world. During freezing spring nights, when every birth carried uncertainty, some lambs arrived healthy and strong within minutes, while others required patient assistance. Before taking their very first breath, shepherds often spent entire nights awake during lambing season, moving from one frightened Away to another beneath flickering lantern light, never knowing whether dawn would bring relief or heartbreak. Seeing those same lambs now racing happily across open fields reminds you that the endless, sleepless nights were not spent in vain. The sheepdog finally stretches beside the entrance to the fold, equally tired after hours of circling restless animals across rolling hills. Its thick coat is dusty, its paws worn from walking the same rough paths as you, yet its sharp eyes continue watching the flock even while resting. Throughout the entire day, the dog never once questioned its duty. It simply worked, responding to small gestures, quiet whistles, and years of shared understanding. In many ways, the shepherd's closest companion is not another person, but this loyal animal who shares every sunrise, every storm, every lonely hillside, and every successful journey home. Together you have faced wandering sheep, swollen rivers, violent thunderstorms, and the occasional hungry predator. Trust built under such circumstances becomes stronger than words could ever describe. Only after everything has been checked do you finally begin the short walk toward your own cottage. The path feels strangely different now that the day's responsibilities have ended. Earlier, every sound demanded attention. Every movement across the fields required careful observation. Now the countryside seems wonderfully peaceful. Crickets begin singing from tall grass beside the narrow track, while bats silently sweep through the darkening, sky-hunting insects almost invisible against the fading light. Above you, the first bright stars multiply one by one until the heavens seem filled with countless points of silver. Without modern lights to dull their brilliance, the night sky appears almost impossibly beautiful, stretching from one horizon to the other like an endless sea of glittering light. The cottage waiting at the edge of the village is small by almost every measure. Its walls are built from timber packed with clay, the roof covered in thick layers of thatch repaired many times over the years. The doorway is low enough that nearly every adult must bend slightly before entering, and the single room inside serves as kitchen, dining room, workshop, and bedroom all at once. By modern standards, it offers very little comfort. Yet after spending nearly 14 hours outdoors through wind, sunshine, dust, and uneven hills, it feels warmer and more welcoming than any grand hall inside a noble castle. As soon as you step inside, the familiar smell of wood smoke and freshly baked bread replaces the cool scent of the evening fields. A small fire crackles gently within the stone hearth, casting soft orange light. Across rough wooden furniture polished smooth by generations of daily use. Supper is simple, perhaps a thick bowl of barley pottage flavored with onions and herbs, accompanied by coarse bread baked earlier that morning and a small piece of cheese carefully saved from market day. There are no elaborate feasts, silver plates, or musicians performing beside enormous fireplaces. Yet, after a day spent walking mile after mile across open countryside, this humble meal tastes richer than many nobles might imagine. Hunger has always been one of history's greatest cooks. Conversation during supper remains quiet. Everyone in the household has worked since before sunrise, and exhaustion settles over the room almost as heavily as the darkness outside. Someone mentions tomorrow's weather, wondering whether the clouds gathering beyond the western hills might finally bring much-needed rain. Another quietly reminds the family that wool shearing season will arrive before long, bringing several weeks of even harder labor. Plans are discussed not months ahead, but only a few days at a time, because medieval life rarely allows the luxury of certainty. Harvests fail, storms arrive unexpectedly, animals become sick, roads flood. Each season carries its own surprises, and survival depends upon adapting quickly rather than expecting comfort. When the meal has ended, there is still work to do. Boots, damp from morning dew, are placed near the hearth to dry before another pre-dawn journey. Torn clothing is mended beneath flickering candlelight. The wooden crook used throughout the day is inspected for cracks before being leaned carefully beside the doorway, ready for tomorrow morning. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is taken for granted. Even the smallest tools receive careful attention because replacing them requires precious time and money few families can easily spare. Eventually, the fire burns lower, candles grow shorter, and one by one the household prepares for sleep. Outside, the hills lie hidden beneath complete darkness, waiting patiently for another sunrise. Somewhere beyond the village, the sheep rest safely together within their enclosure, unaware that tomorrow will bring another long journey across familiar meadows. You lower yourself onto a simple straw mattress covered by heavy wool blankets that smell faintly of lanolin, smoke, and the countless winters they have already survived. Your muscles ache with the satisfying weariness that follows honest work. The sound of the wind brushing gently against the thatched roof slowly blends with the distant call of an owl somewhere beyond the fields. Before long, your eyes become too heavy to keep open, knowing that in only a few short hours, long before the rest of the world awakens, another medieval morning will quietly begin. As the weeks slowly pass, you begin realizing that a shepherd does not simply care for sheep. In many ways, you become a student of the seasons themselves. Every subtle change in the landscape carries meaning, and every small difference in weather quietly alters the rhythm of your work. During early spring, the hills are painted with fresh green grass that seems to grow almost overnight after weeks of steady rain. Tiny wildflowers begin appearing beneath ancient hedgerows, streams flow quickly with water from melting snow, and the sheep feed eagerly after the long hunger of winter. It is perhaps the most hopeful season of the year, yet it is also one of the busiest. New lambs arrive almost daily. Weak fences damaged by winter storms require constant repair, and muddy paths make every journey slower than expected. Spring promises new life, but it demands endless effort before offering its rewards. Summer brings a completely different challenge. The same thick wool that protected every sheep from freezing winds during winter suddenly becomes an uncomfortable burden beneath the hot afternoon sun. Long before modern veterinarians or scientific farming methods existed, medieval shepherds already understood that overheating could be just as dangerous as freezing temperatures. Whenever the day grows especially warm, you carefully guide the flock toward higher hills where cooler breezes drift across open grasslands. If no shade can be found, the sheep become restless, breathing more heavily while gathering beneath the few scattered trees available across the countryside. You cannot force nature to become cooler. Instead, you learn to work alongside it, adjusting your routes, your pace, and your expectations according to whatever the weather decides to offer that particular day. Water becomes the most valuable treasure during the hottest weeks of summer. Streams that rushed confidently through valleys only months earlier now shrink into narrow channels, barely deep enough for thirsty animals to drink. Small ponds disappear almost entirely, leaving cracked earth where clear water once reflected the sky. Every experienced shepherd remembers exactly where reliable springs continue flowing even during the driest years. That knowledge often separates successful farmers from those who lose animals through simple exhaustion. Reaching those hidden water sources may require walking several extra miles across difficult ground. Yet every additional step feels worthwhile when hundreds of sheep lower their heads together, drinking quietly beneath the shade of ancient willow trees after hours beneath the blazing sun. Summer also brings visitors to the hills. Travelers crossing the countryside often stop for a brief conversation, grateful to meet another human being after hours of walking lonely roads. Some are merchants heading toward distant markets with wagons full of cloth, spices, or iron tools. Others are pilgrims making long journeys toward famous churches or monasteries carrying little more than walking staffs, worn boots, and deep faith. Occasionally wandering monks pause to share bread while speaking softly about distant towns, recent harvests, or troubling news carried from neighboring kingdoms. For a shepherd spending entire days alone with sheep, even a conversation lasting only 10 minutes feels surprisingly precious. Once the traveler disappears over the next hill, silence quietly returns, and the countryside once again belongs only to the wind, the birds, and the slow rhythm of grazing animals. Not every visitor is welcome. Every shepherd eventually learns to recognize the quiet signs left behind by thieves long before meeting them face to face. A broken section of hedge where someone recently climbed. Through strange footprints crossing soft ground beside the flock, a distant campfire burning where no traveler should reasonably stop. Sheep represented wealth in medieval Europe, and wherever wealth existed, dishonest people occasionally followed. Most theft happened at night, when darkness hid movement across open fields and frightened animals could be driven away before anyone noticed. Because of this constant danger, many shepherds developed the habit of sleeping lightly, waking at the smallest unfamiliar sound outside their cottages. Even dreams rarely offered complete escape from responsibility. Autumn gradually transforms the countryside once again. The bright green hills of summer slowly fade into softer shades of gold, amber and faded brown, while cold morning mist returns to the valleys. Leaves drift lazily from oak and beech trees, covering familiar paths with dry, rustling carpets that crunch beneath every step. The air feels sharper now, carrying the unmistakable promise of another winter approaching beyond the horizon. Sheep grow thicker coats, almost without anyone noticing, instinctively preparing for colder months long before frost finally arrives. Watching these quiet changes year after year teaches patience unlike anything found inside busy medieval towns. The land never rushes. Nature follows its own ancient schedule, completely indifferent to human plans or wishes. Autumn is also the season when every shepherd begins thinking constantly about winter survival. Hay must be gathered while fields remain dry enough to cut. Barns require inspection before heavy snow arrives. Weak sections of fencing need strengthening because repairing them becomes far more difficult once frozen ground hardens beneath every post. Even simple tasks like collecting firewood suddenly become urgent. A pile that seemed enormous during warm September, afternoons may feel dangerously small by the middle of January. Medieval life encourages careful planning because mistakes made in autumn often become impossible to correct once winter closes, roads freezes, streams and buries hills beneath deep snow. As daylight grows shorter, evenings arrive with surprising speed. One moment the hills still glow beneath gentle afternoon sunlight, and the next they disappear beneath cool blue shadows stretching silently across. The valleys, returning home, now requires greater care than it did during summer. Darkness falls before many tasks have fully ended, making every delayed journey more uncertain. You count the sheep more carefully than ever, watching each animal pass through the fold while the first stars quietly appear overhead. Every successful evening brings a small feeling of relief. Another day completed, another flock safely returned, another quiet victory that history will never record, yet one upon which countless medieval families depended year after year. Winter arrives quietly at first. One cold morning you step outside expecting another ordinary day, only to discover that the familiar green hills have disappeared beneath a thin blanket of white frost. Every blade of grass sparkles beneath the pale morning sun. Every wooden fence shines with delicate crystals of ice, and each breath leaves a drifting cloud hanging briefly in the still air before fading away. The sheep seem strangely reluctant to leave the warmth of the fold, gathering close together as though they understand the difficult months waiting ahead. You pull your heavy wool cloak tightly around your shoulders, grip your weathered shepherd's staff with stiff fingers, and begin another journey that feels far different from the gentle mornings of spring. Winter does not simply make the countryside colder. It changes every part of a shepherd's life, slowing every movement while making even the simplest task require twice the effort. The hills that once provided endless fresh grass now appear almost lifeless beneath frost and occasional snow. Finding enough food for hundreds of hungry animals becomes the greatest challenge of the season. Instead of allowing the flock to wander freely across open meadows, you carefully guide them toward sheltered valleys where patches of grass still survive beneath hedgerows or along sunny slopes untouched by deep snow. Every decision matters. Leading the sheep to the wrong field may leave them without enough food before the journey home. Walking to far wastes precious energy that both shepherd and flock desperately need to survive the bitter cold. Winter teaches lessons in careful judgment that no book could ever fully explain. Some mornings the wind becomes the true enemy. It races across the open hills with astonishing force, cutting through layers of wool clothing as though they barely exist. Snow swirls around your boots, hiding familiar paths beneath drifting white banks, while icy branches creak softly above your head. The sheep lowered their heads against the freezing air, moving silently in a tight group while your faithful dog works tirelessly around the edges, refusing to allow even the weakest lamb to fall behind. You can no longer feel your fingertips, your cheeks burn from the cold, and every breath stings inside your chest. Yet stopping is never an option. The flock depends entirely upon your determination, and responsibility has always been stronger than comfort. There are days when the weather becomes so severe that leaving the sheepfold would be foolish. Thick snow buries the hills, freezing rain coats every branch with dangerous ice, and visibility falls until the nearest tree almost disappears into a wall of white. On such days, the entire routine changes. Instead of walking across open countryside, you remain close to the fold, carrying armfuls of carefully stored hay collected during the warmer months. Every bundle reminds you why autumn preparation mattered so much. The long hours spent cutting grass beneath the summer sun now repay themselves with every sheep that remains healthy through another freezing week. Medieval life constantly rewards those who prepare early and punishes those who believe tomorrow will always resemble today. Winter nights feel especially long. Darkness arrives before the day's work seems finished, and silence settles across the countryside with surprising speed. The hills that echoed with birdsong only months earlier now lie perfectly still beneath moonlight, reflecting from snow-covered fields. Occasionally, the distant howl of a wolf drifts through the frozen air, reminding every shepherd that hungry predators also struggle through the hardest season of the year. You rise from your bed more than once during the night, lantern in hand, simply to check that the sheep remain calm behind their fence. Many people imagine shepherds sleeping peacefully after sunset, yet the reality is often interrupted by constant worry. Responsibility does not disappear simply because the sun has gone down. Then, almost without noticing exactly when it happened, winter slowly begins losing its grip upon the land. Snow melts into rushing streams. Frozen earth softens beneath gentle rain. Tiny green shoots push bravely through soil that seemed completely lifeless only weeks before. Birds return one morning with cheerful songs filling the air as though celebrating the arrival of another spring. The sheep sense the change long before people speak about it. They become livelier, wandering farther across fresh grass while newborn lambs once again appear among the flock, awkwardly finding their feet beneath warm sunlight. The endless cycle quietly begins again, exactly as it has for countless generations before you. Looking back across an entire year, you realize that being a medieval shepherd was never simply about watching sheep. It meant becoming part of the landscape itself. You learned to read the clouds before storms arrived, to recognize every bird call echoing across distant woods, to understand the silent language of nervous animals, and to measure time not by clocks but by blossoms, harvests, falling leaves, and the first frost of winter. Every season left its mark upon your hands, your face, and your memory. The work was lonely, exhausting, and often unforgiving, yet it offered something that many people living inside crowded towns or towering castles rarely experienced. It allowed you to witness the quiet rhythm of the natural world every single day, from the first pale light of dawn until the final stars appeared above sleeping hills. Perhaps that is why so many shepherds accepted such a demanding life despite its hardships. They knew every valley by heart, every winding stream, every ancient oak standing alone against the horizon, and every sheep that depended upon their care. Their names rarely appeared in royal records or grand histories. No magnificent monuments were built in their honor, and few songs celebrated their ordinary days. Yet, without their patience, their endurance, and their quiet dedication, medieval villages would have lacked wool for clothing, milk for food, and flocks that supported countless families through generations of changing seasons. Their work was rarely admired, but it was always essential. So tonight, as our journey through the rolling hills of medieval Europe comes gently to an end, imagine yourself standing one final time upon a quiet hillside as the sun slowly disappears beyond the distant horizon. The flock grazes peacefully below, your faithful dog rests beside your feet, and a cool evening breeze carries the scent of wild grass across the valley. Church bells ring softly from a village hidden beyond the hills, while smoke rises from tiny cottages preparing for another peaceful night. Tomorrow the routine will begin again before sunrise, just as it always has. Another long walk, another careful count of every sheep. Another day lived beneath endless skies where patience mattered more than speed, and quiet responsibility shaped every waking hour. And as darkness gently settles across the countryside, allow those peaceful medieval hills to fade into the distance. Let the soft sounds of grazing sheep become quieter with every breath, and drift slowly into a deep, comfortable sleep, leaving the shepherd, the flock, and another timeless day resting peacefully beneath the stars.